Farm Workers of America and led a movement that won them better wages and the right to organize. Dolores will be joined on stage by one of the Obama Foundation's Community Leadership Corps members from right here in Chicago, Oscar Sanchez. Though just in his 20s, he is already working to ensure communities on the Southwest side are counted in next year's census. Their conversation will be moderated by author and journalist Sarah Smash. In her book, Heartland, she shares powerful stories of her roots in Kansas, of a working class struggling to prosper, of a home worth fighting for. Please welcome on stage Oscar Sanchez, Dolores Huerta, and Sarah Smash. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. So I'd like to start with a question for Ms. Huerta. We might think of our world as two distinct geographic parts, one being disadvantaged places that are negatively stereotyped and we're encouraged to get out of or avoid those places, and the other being spots that have greater access to privilege and power. Since sometimes people don't cross the line there between, and you yourself have always turned toward rather than away from disadvantaged spaces, what about struggling communities might surprise more privileged people who have not witnessed it firsthand?
Well, I think I was very fortunate in growing up because I grew up in a kind of a farming community called Stockton, California. And this was after the Depression in the 30s. And in my community, I was so fortunate because we had so many different ethnic groups. My next door neighbors were Italian immigrants. People catty corner were Greek immigrants. We had Filipino immigrants. We had Chinese, Japanese, actually somebody from Afghanistan. And of course, my next door neighbors were African Americans. And I think that I was so privileged to be able to grow up with all of these different ethnic groups and diversity. And I feel sorry for people that do not have that experience. Because I think once you grow up with different cultures, that it just prepares you for life. And sometimes somebody asked me once about our president. I think he never had that privilege of talking about the President Trump. He never had that privilege to grow up with different people, especially people of color. And because I think that does, when you have that opportunity, it just prepares you for life.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you as saying that places that are thought of as not being worldly actually might be very sophisticated in ways that...
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Oscar, a question for you. I, as a journalist and writer, often think about how our place shapes our language. That might have to do with ethnicity and culture, but also even dialect and class, who has access to education and certain vocabularies. Sometimes activism can be a middle class or upper middle class enterprise, and well-meaning people might be using words that create kind of barriers between themselves and those that they seek to empower. So with your work on the ground right here in Chicago, working to empower communities toward representation in the 2020 census, what are you learning and seeing and employing about effective communication?
So I think it all starts with being authentic, like being really yourself. So I'm from the South Side, and a lot of people don't say that, oh, you sound like you're from the South Side. So the first thing with that is always like, effective communication always starts with effective listening. So making sure that you know the community you're working with, and you have to understand them. It's not like you're introducing a solution to a community, but you're introducing a community, you're introducing the community to a solution. And it's about leading them towards it and working together with them. Especially in the census, I'm learning how to let's get rid of all this jargon, these terms that people don't understand, and break them down and make sure they understand what we're trying to do. Because I come from a community that were really misrepresented, and it's making them understand how they're misrepresented and making sure that they understand that we're lacking resources. But it's always about communicating that and being really transparent with your agenda. It's saying like, we are here to help. We're here to, not from like this complex of savior, right? We're here literally because I come from the same problems that you're facing. So just being authentic at the end of the day.
you want to add anything to that, Dolores?
Oh, yeah, I think the whole thing about democracy to begin with, that it doesn't work unless people participate. And the people that do need to participate are the poor people and working people. And sometimes they don't think that they have the power, that they can't make any difference. So the main thing that we have to do when we organize is to explain to people, you do have power. Even if you don't have a lot of money, even if you don't have you might say an education, going to college, etc. But the fact that you have the power in your person, and if we get people to understand that this is all the power that you need, but also to know that you can't do it alone. But if all of us come together and we take direct action, this is the way that we make the changes. And we don't need anybody to come and do it for us. And in fact, what people have to understand, if you don't do this, it's not going to change. So we have a responsibility, each and every one of us, that we've got to participate, we've got to be involved. And I know a lot of people, you know, they have their work, or students have school, they have family problems. But I like to say to people, you know what? If you get involved civically and you get engaged, those problems that you have, they're going to resolve themselves anyway, okay? They're going to go away. Because when you're actually helping other people, then all of your problems diminish, and you're distracted from your problems, because you know you're doing some good and trying to make a change in the world and in your community.
You have been affecting that change in communities for so long, across so many decades, that I was thinking about how so many people in this room, many of them young people, you know, are world changers. They are out to make a difference. Many of them are at the beginning of their journeys. I recently interviewed a young woman who's the daughter of farm workers in the Central Valley, and she now works as a first-generation college graduate for the United Farm Workers Foundation. And she was telling me a story about how her teenage brother, in fairly recent memory, almost died of heat stroke in the fields. And I was thinking, so much progress has been made, and yet we all recognize in this room that we still live in a world where race, class, gender, and other markers affect your chances in life. So I know you get asked this question frequently, but as someone who has found the spirit to stay in it for so long, in spite of setbacks, what would you impart to Oscar and his peers about the long fight?
Well, the journey for justice is a long one. And I think the main thing we have to do is, you know, stick and keep our eye on the prize. But one thing that I have been sharing with people, because so much of you might say, the oppression and the fact that people are suffering comes from this disease of racism. Dr. Martin Luther King said that racism is an illness. It's a sickness. And so we have to see ourselves as healers. And one of the things that I love to say to audiences is just to remember that we are one human race, Homo sapiens. And we have to remember, where did our race begin? Our human race began in Africa. What does that mean? That means that we are all Africans of different shades and colors. And so we can say to the, you know, all the KKKs, the white nationalists, get over it, you're Africans, okay? Enough already, just stop it.
And Oscar, what question, just to kind of flip that coin, what question would you ask of Dolores Huerta?
So I think it's really important to empower individuals. So I was wondering, how can we as individuals, as siblings, as parents, as a community, how can we encourage the next generation? How can we encourage youth to be more civically engaged and more civically responsible?
Well, I think we have to make them understand that youth is actually, they are the leaders not only of the future, but also of the present. And we have seen this now with so many young people fighting to, you know, get gun control, fighting to make sure that we can make people understand that we have global warming. And so a lot of young people are our current leaders, but we have to invite them in. Because a lot of people don't get involved because nobody ever invites them to join. And right now we're working on the census, and we're asking people to please get involved in your neighborhoods, because each one of us that does not get counted, we are going to lose thousands and thousands and millions of dollars if people of color do not get counted. And we've got to tell them, don't be afraid. There's not going to be a citizenship question on the census, okay? And if anybody tries to share any information, they can go to prison for 5 years or get a $250,000 fine. But if we don't all get involved in making people understand, you've got to get counted, because the money from the federal government goes into your community, depending on how many of us are in that community. And also we will lose congressional seats, we will lose representation if people of color do not get counted.
And how is your foundation, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, handling the census specifically?
Well, right now we are doing as much outreach as we can. We're trying to set up neighborhood committees so that people will volunteer to say, I will go into my neighborhood and I will canvass my neighborhood to make sure that everybody here gets counted. So we're working on this right now. We're not waiting till March of 2020 when the questionnaires come out. We've got to start doing that organizing right now, because in the Latino community, there's a lot of fear. You know, when Donald Trump came down on that elevator and attacked Mexicans, you know, and he's continued to do that. And so a lot of undocumented people have a lot of fear. And so we're saying to them, don't be afraid, that information cannot be shared. So we need you to get counted.
And Oscar, you're very directly engaged in that work right now in Chicago. I don't mean to out you, but backstage we were talking about it, and he said, you know, at first blush, I'll be honest, it sounded kind of boring, the census. But you found that that was an incredibly dynamic springboard to a host of other issues. If you could just talk to the importance that you witness in some very specific ways for being counted.
Yeah, so like I said, specifically to the census, and like every one of us in this room, in some way we're misrepresented. And that's the whole root when we came up to it. We were thinking, how can we encourage youth? And that's the whole motive of the team. And we're like, okay, so we're like, how can we ensure that these communities are getting the resources they need? And that's what led us to the census. And the more we started digging, the more we saw that for many years, especially the Black community has been misrepresented. There was a study in 2010 that there was a projected 2 million Black males missing from the census. And we think of all the communities in Chicago that are predominantly Black, that their resources they're not there. So we're like, how can we make sure and ensure that these communities, they're not falling apart? So that's what really kept motivating us. And that's hearing things like that just makes you want to work more and more to make sure that we're helping everyone, the ones that are affected the most, and we're affected the most. Even when we were talking with the Latin community, I'm part of the Latin community, and we're scared, but it's ensuring safety, ensuring that they want us to be scared so we're not accounted for, but we want to be accounted for because we are here. Like, we are here. And we have to make them know that we're here. We have to make them know that we're going to be empowered to make sure that we get what we need to help our people.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit away from the specifics of activism to just think about the spirit that motivates it or activates it. I grew up on a wheat farm in southern Kansas, learned how to do the country two-step at rodeos. And I know that you are a lifelong dancer from a different culture and a different tradition. And I was thinking about how dance is, it is specific to a place. It is very much of a place and a culture, and yet is transcendent in its ability to bring people together in a moment of revelry or celebration. So I was wondering if you could reflect, Ms. Huerta, on what we activists could learn from a dance floor.
Well, I think that the organizing work is so difficult because you're trying to get rid of people's apathy. You're trying to give them power, trying to make them understand that they can make changes. And so when we think of that kind of work, then you also need to have some kind of joy in the process. I mean, you know, like during the civil rights movement, there were a lot of freedom songs, you know. And if people can get out there and dance, I think it kind of, it makes you get rid of some of the tensions that you have. But also, I think dancing is very important. I'm going on 90 years. Next year, I'll be 90 years old. But I think, but I can walk, so I can still walk pretty good. And I like to say to all young people, dance a lot because your legs are going to get stronger. And then when you get my age, then also, you know, you can still dance. And so we have to bring joy into the work that we do so that we don't get the burnout, you know. We have to have fun while we're making it happen. And, but this work that we need to do right now in organizing is just so crucial. With my organization, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, not only are we working on communities to empower them to take power, run for the school board, get elected, run for the water board, run for city council, run for the Congress. People have to take power. Like Reverend Jim Lawson says, we've got to dismantle the systems of oppression. But we got to have fun while we're doing it at the same time. We got to stop the school to prison pipeline, which is another thing that we're working on. Suing our school district, who actually they actually expelled 2,600 African American and Latino students. This is down in Bakersfield, Kevin McCarthy's district, okay? 2,600 African American and Latino students in 1 year. But we sued them. That number has gone from 2,600 to 26, okay? But we've got to do that work at the grassroots level so that we can change the conditions and to create the country and the world that President Obama wanted to create. We've got to continue that struggle.
Thank you. And Oscar, to turn back to you on that same question, we were talking backstage about your relationship to where you come from and your family, and yet you have this activist spirit which can present sometimes as very serious or heavy to people that aren't engaged in the fight. So on that same question about joy and what activates you as somebody very early in your journey, while you've already accomplished so much, in your early 20s, setting out many decades ahead of you in the fight for justice, what's your relationship to this idea about just sort of a joyful spirit to be brought to the work?
That's a tough one. It's tough because I feel like there's always this pressure from the older generation to you have to be doing this, you have to do this. And then I always remind myself like Dolores said, this work takes a long time. So why am I gonna burn myself out and not encourage or motivate other people to be involved in the work? I'm not gonna do that. We just have to encourage more people and have a good time. People know I'm not that serious. People I grew up knows that I laugh at everything. I joke about everything. You have to just be this free spirit when it comes to enjoy life. And when you're enjoying life, you're kind of giving a middle finger to the oppressor at the end of the day, because it's I'm living life still and I'm not gonna let anything turn me down. So I think that's my best response.
Well said, well said. So we're out of time, actually, and I think that Ms. Huerta wanted to end with maybe engaging the audience directly.
Yes, well, I want to ask the audience a question, and I know you know the answer, but I want you to do the answer all together, okay? And my question is a really simple one. I'm going to ask you 2 questions. I'm going to ask you, don't answer yet, okay? I'm going to ask you who's got the power, and I want you to say, we've got the power. And when I say what kind of power, I want you to say people power. But I want us to shout it so loud that all of those neo-Nazis, homophobes, climate deniers, misogynists, sexual harassers, okay, the bigots, so they can hear us. Can we do that? Okay, let's go. Who's got the power?
We got the power.
What kind of power?
People power.
So are we going to continue the journey for justice? And we will say it in President Obama's words, yes, we can. Let's all do it with an organized hand clap. Let's go. Yes, we can. 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 Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You know, Chicago was where my vision of becoming something greater happened, and it started. So Chicago for me will always be that motivation. It will always be the city where I'm proud to say I'm from. You know, I always use the word Chicago tough because we're built different. We have to be. And I take that everywhere I go. You know, every room, every boardroom I walk in, every arena that I've ever stepped in, I take that mentality that nothing is ever given to us and nothing will ever be given to us. We have to go take it and we have to earn it. And that's what Chicago has meant to me. And for the next gen and for the next generation, I hope they understand the importance of the city. I hope they feel a pride of coming from Chicago, but also understanding that a lot of work has to be done. And if you're blessed enough, if you have the opportunity to have more than others, you make sure that you continue to give back, to give to your community, you give to your city and your state.
Welcome Obama Foundation CEO, David Seamus.
Wow. What can I do where I am? What can I do to make things a little bit better where I live? That's the question that Toni Morrison asked as a young editor during the middle of the civil rights movement, when there was change occurring all around her. What can I do where I am? She decided to use her gifts, her passion, and her position as an editor, basically to lift up the ideas and the words and the voices of people all around her, to make sure that they were being seen and heard. She then became one of those voices herself, writing novels that made sure that every face was seen, that every voice was heard, that every story was told in a way that changed not just literature, but helped define who we are as a people. What can I do where I am? That question and so many questions like it are at the heart of what we at the Obama Foundation seek to do. When people ask that question or a question like that, what can I do where I am? We seek to have them be inspired by that question, not to look to their left or to their right or to someone else, but to look first within themselves for the voice and the power that they have, but then to begin to analyze what needs to be done in their community. That is their responsibility. We seek to empower them, whether they are in South Africa, in Southeast Asia, or right here on the south side of Chicago, not by giving them something that they don't already have, but with some tools and some support so that they can be more powerful than they even imagine. And then more importantly, once we do that, we seek to connect them. We seek to connect this network of change makers together because there is a truth that all of you are seeing here at this gathering. That even though all of us have voice and power and agency, none of us do anything alone. The things that we accomplish together are far greater than what we can do by ourselves. And so gatherings like this, you see it manifested digitally with our online tools and our storytelling tools. And then one day on the south side of Chicago in Jackson Park at the Obama Presidential Center, there will be a place that will be a beacon for people who, when they ask that question, what can I do where I am? They know that there is a place on the south side of Chicago where hope lives. That's what we're doing. And when you draw people together and you make connections like the connections we've made, and you witness how important it is for a young person who is beginning her leadership journey to be guided and inspired by someone who's a little bit further along in their journey, you see now how where I am and what I can do becomes real for so many people. And so today, I am so proud to introduce a conversation that will let you see how we do that. I'd like you to join me in welcoming to the stage 4 of our Obama Foundation program participants. I'd like to welcome DeAndre Brown, Samira Kujak, Mimi Gonzalez, and Awa Francesca Mbuli. Please welcome them to the stage. And these powerful young people are going to take part in an amazing conversation with a brilliant young actor, organizer, and activist, Yara Shahidi. And ladies and gentlemen, the 44th President of the United States of America, Barack Obama. don't.
going on out there? All right, settle down, all of you.
Hello, everybody. I am so honored to be here. Can we just see how's everyone's day been?
Good. Excellent.
It's been pretty incredible, and I'm really honored to be here and share space with incredible leaders in their own right, and start a fascinating conversation that continues in the vein of, I think everything we've heard this morning and everything we continue to hear about the importance of the individual and the importance of our communities that raise us. And I think, should we just jump right in? Is that okay?
Let's just jump in.
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, what I loved is just the theme of this conference, talking about place, because I think for me, place is always really represented in interacting with your history and the legacy of where you are. One of the only tattoos on my body, this is a side note, but it will make sense in a second.
Mom's wondering where this is going right now.
We actually have tattoos in the same place. She knows exactly where this is going.
Okay.
But it's 1963, and it, for me, represents the work that was done that year, as well as the atrocities that occurred that year, from the bombing of the Birmingham church and the assassination of Medgar Evers to the March on Washington, and more importantly, a larger idea of people continuing to work towards a future they weren't necessarily guaranteed but deemed essential. And I know that 63 is also a pivotal year for Chicago, as 200,000 students boycotted segregationist school policies. And so in talking about place, one of my first questions is just, how do we as a community continue in the legacy of the work that's presented to us?
Well, first of all, I am just thrilled with this representation of amazing young leaders that I've had the opportunity to get to know and to see and to learn from and be inspired by all around the world. And Yara, thank you for participating and helping to moderate this. The objective of the foundation is to create more and more platforms by which all of you can thrive and succeed. And one thing to remember about 1963 is that most of the leaders of the civil rights movement were your age. I mean, Dr. King, when he first started with the Montgomery bus boycott, was 25, 26. Think about that. John Lewis, who is one of the only remaining, in fact, I think is the only living person on the original program that I have framed. It was given to me as a gift from the March on Washington, was just barely 20, 21. And so one place to start when you think about where do we go next, how do we continue to bring about greater equality, greater justice, greater opportunity, is to remind yourselves that the same doubts, uncertainties, struggles, difficulties, challenges that sometimes may weigh you down, they were going through. The same divisions and arguments about how should we approach social change, who should be in charge, what are our best tactics. They were having those same discussions and arguments. And perhaps most importantly, I think it's really useful to remind ourselves that they were part of a continuum just as you are part of a continuum. So we were talking backstage about the notion of nonviolent resistance. Well, Dr. King and civil rights workers had learned the idea of nonviolent resistance by watching Gandhi in India and the movement to achieve independence from colonialism. And so they were part of that continuum. They were part of a continuum of Charles Hamilton Houston, one of the first African Americans to attend Harvard Law School, who helped to engineer the strategy with Thurgood Marshall that ultimately led to Brown versus Board of Education. That was another part of the river that they were merging with. Rosa Parks had learned to sit down, not just because her feet were tired, but because the Highlander School, which drew on some of the activist traditions dating back to the Great Depression and before, that was part of the stream. So you're part of that continuum, and the good news is that when you start feeling that you're part of something larger, that you're taking a baton from somebody else and then you're running your stage of the race and then you're passing it on, A, you don't feel as alone. B, it also gives you a sense of perspective and some patience, because it is very rare where change happens overnight. And that's, now, when you're young, you're supposed to be impatient. If you're too patient and you're young, you may not get to where you want to go. But the danger of impatience is you can get discouraged if change doesn't happen right away. And I think that the most important thing for all of you is to remember that the work you're doing in this place at this moment is not going to be the beginning, and it's not the end. And as long as you are doing good work in that moment, at that time, and helping people concretely move the needle a little bit, push that boulder up the hill just a bit, then you can take satisfaction with that, and that's what builds over time. But I don't know, does that make sense? Mimi, what do you think about the question? How do you think about being part of as a really young person, and you're trying to figure out in your specific community, when you're out there bringing about change, are you thinking about the struggles of people before you, or are you just thinking, man, this seems hard, and how do I get this done now, and what do you think?
Well, I'm not really focused on if it's hard for me, you know.
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing, just so that people know.
So I'm Mimi. I'm in the Hartford Community Leadership Corps. My project there, we are trying to create an organization called Wealthy Minds. So don't think wealthy like money, think wealthy like wellness. So Wealthy Minds. And basically what we want to do, so there's a lot of resources in Hartford, but a lot of people don't know where they are. Maybe they have an access issue, or they just don't know how to get to these resources. So my group and we want to create a platform and a space where we can connect these people in Hartford with the resources we already have. And while we do that, we also want to connect it back to the arts. Because whenever there's something going on in the community, you know, the way we express pain is through the arts. Like sometimes we want to listen to music, or we want to do spoken word, or we, you know, go to see a film, whatever it is, the arts provide an outlet for everybody. And that's what we want to do. So we had our first pop-up event actually two weeks ago, and it was amazing. We had about 50 people come out, and we partnered with the Jordan Porco Foundation, Hartford Psychological Services, and the Hartford Gay and Lesbian Health Collective, and they provided resources that we could give back to the people already in our community. And we had a drag performer perform, we had a spoken word singer, and it just felt like a space of healing towards something better.
Excellent. Fantastic. Do you want to move on to another question? Because I've got questions for all these people.
Yeah, then
Because they're really much more interesting than me. Or at least you've heard from me more than you've heard from them.
Okay, well then, for the sake of hearing from somebody else, let's actually hear from DeAndre, who has a question about what catalyzes change.
Okay. So, good afternoon. I gotta be formal for the television, you know. But my question is, I know what passion and drive it takes to work hard and change something, and to do something that many other people can't do. What, as a black man, what made you believe that you can change an entire country or change things in an entire country in a place where I've especially been told that I can't do it? And when did that happen?
I was dropped on my head as a child. And so I didn't have any sense. I think this actually connects with Yara's earlier question about how do we sustain a movement. There's a corollary to that, which is how do we sustain our own sense of hope and drive and vision and motivation, and how do we dream big? And for me, at least, it was not a straight line. It wasn't a steady progression. Mm-hmm. It was an evolution that took place over time as I tried to align what I believed most deeply with what I saw around me and with my own actions. One of the things that I used to do trainings for community organizers, and we used to tell folks, if you want to know what your values are right now, look at where you're putting your time, your money, your energy. You may tell yourself that you are really community-minded, but if all your time, money, and energy is going into going to the club or playing sports, then that's actually what's important to you. Now, what happens is as a young man, I've said before that I was kind of a goof-off. When I was your age, I was not sitting on the stage talking in some serious voice about I was out there trying to get with some girl or playing basketball or, doing things I shouldn't have been doing. Mm-hmm. But what started happening was that I would read, let's say, about Nelson Mandela and the struggles in South Africa, and I'm in a class and I'm raising my hand and I've got some opinion, or a representative of the African National Congress would come to campus, and they were my age, and they're risking potentially getting thrown in jail, or they're in exile trying to struggle, and I'm saying to myself, if I really do believe in that, then what am I doing about it? Yeah. And what am I willing to give up? And what am I willing to sacrifice? And so there was this long process for me of aligning what I said I believed in with my behavior, and then testing what I could change so that the world would align better with what I believed in and my values. And so the first stage is just kind of figuring out, all right, what do you really believe? What's really important to you? Not what you pretend is important to you, but what is really important to you. And what are you willing to risk or sacrifice for it? The next phase is then you test that against the world, and the world kicks you in the teeth and says, you may think that this is important, but you know what? We've got other ideas. And who are you? And you can't change nothing. And so then you get through a phase of trying to develop skills and courage and resilience, and you try to fit your actions to the scale of whatever influence you have. So I came to Chicago, and I'm working on the South Side on trying to get a park cleaned up or trying to get a school improved. And sometimes I'm succeeding, a lot of times I'm failing, but over time you start getting a little bit of confidence with some small victories. And that then gives you the power to then analyze and say, here's what worked, here's what didn't, here's what I need more of in order to achieve the vision or the goals that I have. Now, let me try to take it to the next level, which means then some more failure, right? And some more frustration because you're trying to expand the orbit of your impact. And I think it's that iterative process, right? It's not you come up with a grand theory of here's how I'm going to change the world, and then suddenly it all just goes according to clockwork, at least not for me. For me, it was much more me trying to be the person I wanted to believe I was, and at each phase challenging myself and testing myself against the world to see if, in fact, I could have an impact and make a difference. Over time, you'll surprise yourself. And it turns out that you can, and by the way, I took one particular path, but I would imagine those of you who, let's say, are teachers, the first time you go in a classroom, those kids are going to say, you clearly don't know what you're talking about. And they'll be bored, and they'll test you, and you're frustrated, and you're depressed. I know because my sister is a teacher. And then over time, you gain more confidence, right? It's the same thing. If you are running a health clinic, or you are trying to engage in human rights work, it's this constant fine-tuning of matching your values, your actions, and your impact. And that takes time, right? So you shouldn't expect at 18 that you got a master plan. Samira, you're doing extraordinary work in some of the most difficult imaginable places with people who have been severely traumatized by a terrible conflict. I'm assuming that you've had to go through this similar phase where there are a lot of times where you say to yourself, how can I have any impact in something this large? Maybe you can share with people what it is that you're doing, and then describe how have you thought, because you're slightly older than DeAndre. Yeah. You look at the same age, but you've already been able to build up an organization and focused your work. So you're a little further down that path. Tell us a little bit about what that's been like.
Well, to start with, it's exactly what you were talking about, the small victories that matters. Because yes, we resist, we mobilize, and we fail. But we always find some kind of small victories that gives us hope to continue and keep on going. But we learn from our failures. And I work in the field of missing persons from the Syrian conflict. And there's, as you know, conflict is all over the Middle East. And what we do is we try to, one, allow people to have voice, because it's very important. It's very important in shifting narratives. And once we're able to shift narratives, we're able to mobilize more, to have solidarity with different individuals who are going through the same things. At the moment, the fight continues, because there's no peace yet in Syria. But the people are empowered. The people are empowered through international advocacy, through different mechanisms available for them, and through their own voice, the stories that they write. And here comes the importance of human rights and education at the same time. Because it's not only building on now, it's building on the youth. And they are going to actually carry on and fighting this until we are able to reach somewhere beautiful.
I feel like what everyone's saying also ties into this conversation that's being had of focusing on impact over legacy. And part of action is living in such a consistent moment in the present that you're not necessarily thinking about what you're leaving behind, but part of appreciating the small victories is acknowledging the impact that's being made in every exchange.
Look, I used to have these sessions at the end of the White House internship cycle, where you'd get about 200 White House interns. Typically, they'd interned in various offices for about 6 months. And I would come in at the end of their internship with a group session, and they'd ask questions. And these were all, high-achieving type A, gotten straight A's, They did not act like I acted at their age. They were, So invariably, somebody would ask me, Mr. President, they wouldn't be this bold, but it was basically, how can I be president? In the sense of they were asking, no, in a sincere way, they were asking, I'm inspired by the idea of public service. What path should I take? How should I think about it? And the thing I used to tell them, which was something an older friend of mine had told me back when I was still organizing. I remember him telling me, and I related to these young people, worry more about what you want to do rather than what you want to be. Part of the problem of politics is typically, whether it's Washington, D.C. or any other capital around the world, a lot of people got there because they had an idea in their head of, I want to be a congressman, or I want to be a member of parliament, or I want to be X, Y, Z. And first of all, you're playing the lottery a little bit because there's a limited number of those seats available. But the other thing is, when that's your focus, you may spend 10 years just trying to be something, and when you get there, it turns out that you have no idea what you want to do with it. So you have no moral compass, you have no issue or cause that you're willing to sacrifice everything for or lose your seat for. All that's important to you is to stay that thing that you wanted to be, or to be the next thing on whatever the pecking order is. Whereas if you focus on what you want to do, right, the question you're asking is, how can I get these kids who don't have advantages a great education? And I may start off teaching, or I may decide I'm going to start an after-school program, or I may decide that I'm going to mentor while I'm paying the rent doing something else, or I may decide I'm going to hire some of these young people and train them, and organically out of doing that thing, it may turn out that your influence expands and you get expertise in that field, and suddenly you're a leader in advancing the thing that you cared about. And if you do end up being in a high office or in a head of a big organization, what have you, you're very clear about what you're doing about it. And by the way, if it doesn't work out perfectly, exactly the way you planned, along the way, all these people have been touched. All this good's been done. And your life is full. So, chasing an office or a position is a little bit like just chasing money. I don't want to belittle it in the sense of like, you need money to pay the rent. You need a job. That is honorable and right. But after a certain point, what the people I find who end up being most satisfied, even if they're in business, are the people who just, they were really passionate about this thing they wanted to do. That's what excited them, and as a byproduct of that passion, it turned out that they ended up being very successful in business. So, tell us about how you've been thinking about your passion. And I know that you were telling me backstage that some of the things you wanted to do haven't gotten done yet. And so how do you process that, and how do you deal with that and keep on going?
Thank you, Your Excellency.
And tell everybody.
Being a survivor of human trafficking and coming from a community where everyone believes that we have to make it big or large in life by traveling abroad, and then trying to dissuade people from that idea, it seems so difficult, but we have to break boundaries. I do my things my own way with female survivors as well, because we are female-led. We go to the communities, the hinterlands, we talk to people, showing them short videos, pictures of who we were during our ordeal and the present house. We have changed. That sadness is no longer there. It's very difficult to convince them. But our passion still lives. You know, your passion can be food, and if you don't eat, you will not be happy. My passion is to combat human trafficking. So if I don't go there to make a change, I feel as if something in me is lacking. So we always push forward. We push so hard that we don't even feel the pain. We just feel the joy because we are realizing what we are doing. From what we are doing, many people have learned what human trafficking is in my community, because at first, as I've earlier said, they saw it as a sign of prestige in their community or a source to a greater livelihood. But our work is making changes. It is cutting across boundaries. People are reaching back to us with positive stories. We didn't end there. We also start to do some empowerment training, because some people will say, you don't want me to do this, you don't want me to go out. So what do? We try to empower the women in economic empowerment schemes, vocational training, the little we can, and they are doing well in their community. They have now realized that the resources in their community can also be put into use. So our passion is being satisfied and the changes are being made. Thank you, Your Excellency.
And so it feels like there's this connection of everyone in this room of remaining purpose-driven and being united by our drive to consistently be doing. And at the same time, we've also had this conversation on access and the importance of access and resources, as well as the importance of your personal circumstances influencing or feeling like they influence what you can or cannot do, which kind of ties into Samira's question regarding what happens when there are certain things that feel like they are impeding you from the doing itself.
Mm-hmm. Samira, you had
Actually, yeah, I have a question. Thank you, Yara.
yeah, she teed you up.
So you mentioned a lot the importance of peace and peacekeepers in transforming communities. And we just spoke about the time it takes and the little victories. But sometimes there are peacemakers and peacekeepers who jeopardize their safety when they are trying to step up and fight and resist. So what can we do when it comes to that?
Well, you know, this is something that we've been struggling with in the foundation. I struggled with as president. There are parts of the world in which being an activist is not just a matter of sacrificing higher pay or, you know, having longer hours or experiencing frustrations because your issue isn't advanced as quickly as you'd like. There are parts of the world where you'll be imprisoned. There are parts of the world where you may be killed. There are parts of the world where even if you're not killed or imprisoned, your family may be threatened or lose their jobs and their livelihoods because you've been exercising your voice. And there are some participants of this summit who are operating with extraordinary courage in those circumstances. And part of what my personal advice to these advocates has been is that you do what you can, but this is a long path, and so if at any point the threats or dangers that are presented from your work get to be too great, you should not feel as if you are somehow compromised if you say strategically, okay, I have to be careful about how I approach these issues. I'll give you an example. We used to have these young leaders forums around the world while I was still president, and if we were doing it in most European countries, a lot of the young leaders were overtly political. They'd be human rights activists, or they would be young parliamentarians, and they would be challenging the status quo and protesting and et cetera. When we went to Asia, so for example in Vietnam, we had a young leaders corps, I think eventually had like 70,000 members online who would meet and discuss strategy, et cetera. Most of them were entrepreneurs, so they were couching their work as business in a country in which business was welcomed, entrepreneurship was welcomed, overtly political work might be endangered. And so somebody who was concerned about environmental issues there, they might have a startup designed to figure out how do we get clean energy into a community, or how do we recycle, rather than directly say, government, you need to do X, Y, Z. And I think that it's useful to just remind ourselves that there are a bunch of different ways to have an impact. Now, if what's inside of you compels you to take great risks, then that is magnificent. And I, to the extent that I can, certainly when I was president, it's harder now because I don't have some of those formal levers, want to create a ways of protecting. So those who do engage in that kind of activity in countries where that is dangerous, my best advice is to make common cause so that you are not isolated. Right? I mean, if you are a journalist in a country that exercises severe censorship, you being a part of an international journalist organization that knows who you are and sees you, so that if you are suddenly not around, are there to advocate on your behalf and can bring some international pressure to bear, that becomes important. And that's one of the reasons why, one of the functions of the foundation over time, my hope is that it creates sufficient connectivity between people who are working on these issues around the world and inside this country, that nobody is alone. When you're alone, it's tough. Going back to the point you made about the civil rights movement, everybody was scared. You go out into Mississippi or Alabama in the early 60s trying to register folks to vote, it was scary. People were killed or beaten, and which is why courage was generated from us collectively taking that leap. What other questions we have? Because I want to make sure I don't get into trouble. People will, I'll talk. Who hasn't had a chance to ask a question?
I have not.
Go ahead.
Okay. My question reads thus, Your Excellency.
You know, Your Excellency makes me feel old, though. You know, you can call me Barack. Yeah, Barack's good. Mr. Obama, I guess, if you have to.
Okay. You know, I'm coming from Cameroon, and we have an ongoing crisis there. Not political, but my question returns, how can we create economically viable communities for the people who serve in places where conflict threatens progress?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll broaden it a little bit to, you know, one of the biggest challenges that all of us face in wanting to create a more just society is there is some bedrock material necessities that people need to thrive. It's not as much as those of us in wealthy countries think, but you do need food, shelter, health care, clean water. There are some basics. And one of the things, even on the south side of Chicago, that used to be a challenge, there was a saying in the black church that, you know, it's hard to preach to an empty stomach. And so advocates on behalf of social justice cannot ignore economic justice. And it is important for us to constantly incorporate at least an awareness of what may be the economic impediments to justice. So if you are advocating on behalf, that's why the story you were telling was so powerful about young women being vulnerable to trafficking in part because they're trying to figure out, how do I
get a life?
How do I live? And if somebody comes to me and says, oh, if you go overseas, that's the land of milk and honey,
of course,
and you've got nothing, you're more vulnerable.
Of course.
Well, there are versions of that everywhere. The young men who are in the drug trade, just down a few blocks from here, it's because they are in a community in which the fabric of regular work has been broken. And this is the economic framework that they see. And so we cannot ignore the economic elements. Now, the strategies for economic development in rural Cameroon are going to be different than the strategies on the south side of Chicago. There is a basic prerequisite for economic development, and that is you can't have people killing each other. You know, Syria's economy is not going to recover anytime soon. You know, those countries around the world that are in the middle of ethnic conflict, their economies suffer because I always tell, I was talking to Bill Gates about some of the work that, terrific work that his foundation does in terms of vaccinations and other organizations that do work developing these great seeds that can increase agricultural yields. But if all the farmers have fled because a bunch of kids have AK-47s and are shooting and robbing people, you won't get economic development. So there is a basic just people not dying or at war in order to build some sort of economic development strategies. I can speak here to, and this, by the way, is why place is so important. Let's just take the example of the south side of Chicago. Chicago is a wealthy city in the wealthiest country on earth. But there is a segment of this city that does not partake of that wealth the way it should. Part of the reason Michelle and I decided to locate the presidential center here is so that it can serve as a catalyst to stitch together the economies of downtown Chicago and north side Chicago with south side Chicago and eventually west side Chicago. And by bringing a multi-million-dollar project here, one of our goals is to make sure that we're able to create new opportunities for the young people who live here. In one of the sessions, Charles Barkley was talking about how he gets frustrated that not enough young men in the African American community go into the trades, being a plumber, electrician. Well, part of the reason historically is they were discriminated and blocked from joining unions to be part of those trades. But part of it is also culturally we somehow think, well, that's not like a cool career. It's very cool to be a carpenter, a plumber, electrician, and you make a really good living. So when we started putting out bids for who potentially could do the work, we said, if you don't have a plan to get young people in this community on the path of training for these trades, so that at the end of what will be a 4-year project, we don't have just a building, but we suddenly have a whole bunch of young people who suddenly now are able to work on the next building and the next project. Well, then you probably won't be working for us. We've got small businesses, we've got small business districts in the surrounding community around the site where the library will be located. Some of them are struggling. We anticipate 700, 800,000 people may come to visit the library and the Presidential Center. Well, before it's built, we need to be working with that small local restaurant or that local print shop or what have you to say, all right, they're coming. What do you need in order to take advantage of this stream of customers that are going to be coming? So that's an example of being strategic. Our goal is to transform the world and the country and the south side of Chicago. But in this place right now, I've got this building that's going to be built. And that is an engine, a mechanism for economic development. In rural Cameroon, it might be different. It might be the thing that is really going to make a difference is if we can provide some small loans to local farmers so they get a small surplus that allows them to buy a tractor that they can share among 5 farmers, which in turn increases their yield, and maybe after several seasons, they can now do their own processing of that sorghum or maize, and rather than have their profits taken away by the guy who owns the processing plant, they can do their own processing plant on site, sell it directly to a store, and now they start hiring a few more people, and now you start creating jobs, right? Each place is going to have a different strategy. Now, I have to say, this is not an easy thing to do because we now have global capital that can move around the planet in a second. And the people who've got a lot of money want more money. And it's easier for them a lot of times to say, well, I'm just going to invest in some luxury stuff downtown, or I'm going to invest in the rich countries and come up with an app where a bunch of kids will waste their money on a game rather than invest in farmers in Cameroon or a restaurant on the south side, right? So there's a bunch of decision making that is global, and you're trying to get some of those resources local. And that's where organizing and being strategic about how we do that is really important. And that's why it's important for social justice advocates to connect with local businesses and to connect with nonprofits and connect with other institutions. And if there's a university somewhere or there's a school somewhere, how do we figure out whatever resources we have in this place, how do we maximize that in order to get some leverage? And that's a hard thing to do, but nobody said this was going to be easy to do. Yeah. I mean, you know, if you were looking for easy, you're at the wrong summit.
But your comments remind me of something that an activist named Future had said to me, and they had basically said the importance of advocating for somebody or some people other than yourself is that if you only advocate for yourself, all you're asking are for colonial infrastructures to work in your favor. All you're asking for is a shift of privilege rather than this conversation of placing yourself as a part of a global community, placing yourself as somebody who is responsible to people that it may not have interacted with, because that's a process of deprivilegizing space in the first place, to make up a word.
That's a pretty good word, but no, look, you're making a really important point, and this is something that all of us have to struggle with. I have to struggle with. DeAndre, you're going to have to struggle with. You are. No, you are talented, obviously, and there are going to be opportunities for you within the existing structure to do well by the standards that are sold to us about what it means to be successful. And I think each of us have to make constant decisions about how we balance the need to pay the rent, and you know, we want our moms to kind of feel proud of us and know what the heck we're doing. I remember when I told my mother and my grandfather I was moving to Chicago to be a community organizer. They're all like, huh? What? Yeah. And then I explained to them, yeah, no, I'm getting paid $13,000 a year. Even back in 1985, that was broke. I mean, even back then, even with adjusting for inflation, like I was eating tuna every night. I did not have an actual bed because the place was too small, so I had this little futon mattress that I rolled. Couldn't afford the futon, just had the ton. I rolled that thing up, put it in the closet, rolled it back out. I was alone most of that year. Waiting for Michelle. So, where was I? I got distracted. It was so cold that year. But
oh man, that was funny.
all my friends, you know, because I'd gone to a fancy school, and so all my classmates, they were all signed up for, you know, law school or business school, and you know, there was a track that was set up. Right. And I had the privilege, because I wasn't, you know, my family was not wealthy. They were lower middle class, but we had enough So I knew, and I had a good enough education. I said, all right, if I ever need to get a job just to make money, I can, so I can take some risks. Some people don't have that luxury. But to Yara's point, each of us have to constantly remind ourselves we're born into a society, we can't completely remake society in a minute. So we have to make some accommodations to the existing structures. You know, you are working as an actress as well as a student. You know, Samira, you know, even as you're doing your advocacy, you have to fund it, which means that you have to talk to some people who have money. And some of them may have money from places that, you know, if you looked at it, you might say, I'm not crazy about, you know, what you do, but thank you very much.
Yeah.
We're all kind of adjusting to here are the structures that are presented. But this goes back to the point I was making earlier about just constantly testing ourselves about, does this feel like the accommodation I'm making to this existing structure? Am I contributing more or less to the things I want to change? You know, am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem? And you're never going to, you know, this idea of purity and you're never compromised and you're always politically woke and all that stuff, you should get over that quickly. The world is messy. There are ambiguities. Yep. People who do really good stuff have flaws. Right. People who you are fighting may love their kids and, you know, share certain things with you. And I think that one danger I see among young people, particularly on college campuses, Malia and I talk about this. Yara goes to school with my daughter. But I do get a sense sometimes now among certain young people, and this is accelerated by social media, there is this sense sometimes of the way of me making change is to be as judgmental as possible about other people. And that's enough. Like if I tweet or hashtag about how you didn't do something right or used the wrong verb, or then I can sit back and feel pretty good about myself because, man, you see how woke I was? I called you out. I'm going to get on TV, watch my show, watch Grownish. You know, that's not activism. That's not bringing about change. You know, if all you're doing is casting stones, you know, you're probably not going to get that far. That's easy to do.
I think speaking about the importance of media and social media being like a cornerstone of that, there's also this large move of the importance of narrative, which actually ties into what Mimi had wanted to ask.
She could be like a host. This is
really
an Oprah-level segues.
This is really good.
You see how she's working it? Go ahead.
Thank you for that transition. Hello. So, given our theme for this year's summit and how place reveals our purpose, the arts and film in particular can influence our purpose as a nation. So what is a film that has greatly impacted you? And can you provide advice to young leaders and filmmakers like me on how to leverage their craft to help shape our future?
Wow. Well, we were talking about this a little bit backstage. There's a reason why we want to incorporate the arts into the Presidential Center.
Right.
You know, one of our goals is to create a recording studio where young people can come and train with Yara or Steven Spielberg or Chance the Rapper about how do they use the arts to tell a story and to build communities. And be able to have concerts and readings and theater. Because most social change starts with a story. we go back to 1963 or even further, the reason the civil rights movement got all that it accomplished was not because John Lewis and SNCC workers had an army behind them. At first, they didn't even have the laws behind them, but they did have a story behind them. Okay? A story about do unto others, and a story about we're all God's children, and a story about justice rolling down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. There was a story that they tapped into, and it proved to be more powerful than armies and billy clubs and dogs. Just as I mentioned Gandhi earlier, he had a story about what the Indian subcontinent was, and this 5,000-year culture, and that the people who appeared to be poor were full of a life force that could not be matched by the great British Empire. Right? Stories start things off. The Berlin Wall comes down, no missiles are fired. The other side had a better story. So our goal is to make sure that the Presidential Center incorporates that understanding of stories. Now, to your question about I'm going to broaden it not just to films because I'll tell you, when I was a black kid growing up in Hawaii, films that influenced me were like Shaft influenced me. Da-da-da, da-da-da. Because there were not a lot of brothers around who were cool. That had an influence. I was all like, man, look at Richard Roundtree. He's a bad. For those of you who are not familiar with Isaac Hayes, I just wanted to. I probably the things that changed me the most were novels or essays, right? James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, or the autobiography of Malcolm X. There were books about the complexities of politics and change and how individuals get caught up in society. Books like All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren or In Dubious Battle by John Steinbeck. There were books like Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison that changed my understanding of the beauty of a very specific place that people may not see, or the beauty of lives that are forgotten. Or there were books like, some of the most powerful things that changed me were books of people who were not like me, right? So I read The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing. It's a novel about a woman of British background in South Africa who moves to London back in the 60s and 70s. But it was one of the early books to show women as not the love interest or sidekick, but as somebody who's complicated and challenging her roles and feels agency, and it helped me get out of my own, stuff, because, that's the only problem with, you watch Shaft and then that doesn't necessarily help you with how you think about women, right? There's all these ambiguities that you got to figure out. That's the thing about the arts, right? If you are reaching out and looking at enough different stuff, right. I started reading Latin American writers, like Cortázar or Fuentes, or Rulfo, right? And suddenly you realize, oh, in Mexico or Argentina, they're going through stuff I'm going through.
That's right.
That's interesting. Yeah. So that stuff is probably what changed me the most. I will say, but I mentioned Shaft, but it could have been a whole host of things. You know, Sidney Poitier, or for African Americans of my generation, representation of black men in positions of authority, or for black girls, seeing like Diane Carroll recently died. She had a show on television, first black woman who had a show where she wasn't just a maid or the help or the best friend of, but was actually the central figure. That stuff ends up being important. And so when you think about the arts in whatever community, you know, thinking about how are kids imagining themselves? I was going through our house. We found an old book my mother used to read to me called The Snowy Day. Some of you know, yeah, see, everybody went. Yeah. For those of you who don't know the book, it's just your classic children's book. It's about a little boy. He runs out. It's winter. He wants to build a, snowman. He gets like this snowball, puts in his pocket. He gets really close to it. It melts. He's a little sad about it. It's a very simple story. It's sort of a collage. My mom read it to me when I was like 3 or 4. But it's the first children's book by a major publisher. The little boy was black. Wasn't commented on. It wasn't like, oh, ghetto boy, you are in the snow. It was like, no, it's just a boy going on. He happened to be black, yeah. I didn't even remember it until I looked at the book years later, and I was like, huh, that's probably important. So that's how art moves me. In fact, going to children's books, I've said this before, I believe this. I think pretty much everything you need to know is in Dr. Seuss books. If you read about the Lorax, then you know about climate change. If you're reading about Lazy Maisie, and Horton, here's a who, you kind of know, man, don't be lazy Maisie. Work. Dr. Seuss covers most things. That's not the answer you expected, I'm sure. I mean, I love The Godfather, and I can give you a list of movies I love, but. All right, what else we got? How are we doing on time? Yeah?
Time just a little bit. But I think I want to kind of close out this session. You've already talked about the Presidential Center, and we've had a sneak peek of all of the incredible things that are here to come. But I think thinking of the larger Obama Foundation and how much you've done to not only maintain a sense of local community and continue to invest in local community, but also connect local with global, all of the global initiatives that you're doing. And so as somebody that is black and Iranian, has family who is actually here from the south side of Chicago, who I think to me encapsulates what it means to be a leader and what it means to invest in community, I wonder how the Presidential Center is another form of doing that, of making this a space for young leaders to connect and for us to create change.
Well, I think you've described it well. Michelle and I, when we decided what are we going to do next, there are a bunch of issues we care about, and we'll work on, but the most important thing we figured we could do is pass the baton to as many people as possible and cultivate as much talent as possible at every level. And so all of you are part of that initial effort to build a platform where not only can we provide training and ideas and offer some experience about how to bring about social change, but also how can you connect and learn from each other, which is even more powerful. And how can you make sure you're not alone? And how can you recognize how your work connects with somebody maybe on the other side of the country or the other side of the world, or maybe just on the other side of the city. And that's how our programming is designed. What we also realize, though, and this goes to the importance of place, that for us just to have some office downtown somewhere from which we, issue reports and occasionally travel for photo ops, wasn't going to cut it. Because if you can't understand how to change a world if you don't understand how to change a country. And you can't understand how to change a country if you don't know how to change a city. You can't know that unless you know how to change a neighborhood.
That's right.
Because so much of what has become our politics and our movements is virtual, which is great. It's a tool, but it's not that person right there. It's not you and me in a conversation. It's not me seeing what you're going through. It's not me experiencing what it's like with some broken glass under that little boy's feet where there should be a playground, or stepping off and seeing the trash that's floating through a river that has, where all the fish are dead and the fishermen's livelihoods have been taken away. You have to know that. So our thought, okay, we got to have a place, and our place had to be the place where I came of age, and where Michelle was born and raised, and where our babies were born, and where we got married, just down the road, and where I taught law school, and Michelle was a dean, and where I ran my first campaign. So this was going to be the place. And the way we joke about it a little bit like this is the mothership, but another way of thinking about it is we want this to be a university for activism and social change, and a convening place for reimagining how we solve the problems that your generation will confront. And we will connect with satellites and nodes and branches all around the world, but this is going to be the heartbeat. This will be the beacon from which we are sending out a signal that the values we believe in are shared, and that they're strong, and that they can overcome those who would try to undermine them, and that we can make progress. And the great thing about Chicago, and the South Side of Chicago in particular, is the same hunger for change and hope and progress that exists in communities and neighborhoods all around the world. That same hunger exists here. And the same barriers that exist around the world. People who are greedy, or powerful people who are abusing their power, or neglecting places because they're not historically populated with the people who people in power care about. Or what? This is a laboratory for us to be able to make those changes.
That's right.
And as I indicated earlier, we can also use the center as a driver and an example of the kinds of changes that and others were talking about in terms of creating economic opportunity and jobs, and by transforming that landscape and connecting it to other places, it becomes a not just we're talking about change, we actually have a concrete manifestation of it. So that's our goal. And our hope is, though most importantly, that this then becomes the center around which people like Samira and DeAndre and you and Mimi and I, that because you have 1,000, 1,000,000 counterparts around the world. Maybe not as advanced as you are on their journey, but they feel what you feel. And our hope is that over time, what starts off with 1,000 grows to 10,000, grows to 100,000, grows to 1,000,000 of young people who are connected and know each other and have a place that they can always use as home base for the work that they're doing. And if they get in trouble in their country, they've got suddenly an activist network of millions of peers who are going to say, hey, what's happening there? And if they need to help advertise an issue that's important, like human trafficking, suddenly we're pulling everybody together. That's the goal. Plus, we'll have some really good concerts here. And some, some pretty fun parkland. And because I said earlier, if you're looking for easy, you came to the wrong summit. Some of this stuff also has to be fun. Michelle reminded me often that, and she still teases me about like, oh, if it's fun or it tastes good, he doesn't want it. Which, is a little cruel, but there's a little bit of truth to it. There have been times in my life where I just feel like I've got to take myself so seriously and grind, and she helped me to lighten up a little bit. And just as she's done so much for me, so maybe that's a pretty good cue. Should we?
Let's do it.
Hey, Michelle Obama, how about coming up on stage? Oh, did we catch her? Oh, here she is. Did you meet everybody?
Hi, I meet you. Oh, goodness, nice to meet you. Hi. Hey.
Is your mom watching?
Yes, she is. She called me.
So I had to bring Michelle up on stage just because you all wanted to see her again. But also because we just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you. First of all, how smooth was Yara as a moderator?
Great.
Please give her a big round of applause. How remarkable were the members of our conversation? They were outstanding. To all of you who have taken the time to be a part of this, to those of you who were on other panels, who flew in, we don't pay, so it's, they're just doing it out of the kindness of their heart. For those who helped to organize the event, to all the volunteers and young people who helped shuttle people around, make sure credentials were passed out, put everything together. We are so grateful to you. This is always a team effort and a collaboration, and you guys made us proud once again. And to the city of Chicago, and to the south side of Chicago, I just want to say thank you for once again embracing us. Our hope is that you are as excited and jazzed by this vision that we have for the Presidential Center as Michelle and I have been. And we can't wait to continue to provide opportunities for the young people in this particular community, but also around the world to achieve their full potential and, as a consequence, help lift this world up. So you guys have been wonderful. Thank you so much. God bless you. Appreciate you. Great job.
Welcome Obama Foundation CEO, David Seamus.